Hey, hi everyone, this is Koinzell here. So today we're going to do a video talking about comparing Bell C0 to C3 and also against R1 Engulfing. We'll look at the cost of the pools as well, do like a very simple cost-benefit analysis, and I'll give my thoughts about whether to go for a constellation or a specific constellation or R1 Engulfing or even R2 Engulfing. Okay. I would have loved to do the C0 video first, whether or not Bell C0 is worth it, but based on the poll results, a lot more people are interested in talking about going from C0 to C123 slash R1 Engulfing. So we'll do this video first. Now, just remember that the premise of this video is that we are assuming that you have already put a C0 Bell, you are thinking of whether to go further. Okay, so this is the premise of this video. In my next video, I will also do whether or not Bell is worth pulling at C0. Right? Okay, now the figures that you see here, these are actually from my Bell math video. I can show it here. So previously during my Bell math video, if you guys remember, I have already covered what the constellation give in terms of the boost. But we will use the information that we have now, we compile it and we do some proper analysis, yeah. Likewise for weapon comparison, we also have the results here where R1 Engulfing is better than R5 to catch by 27.4%, and R5 Engulfing is better than the catch by 58%. Okay, now let's go back to talking about the comparison. So, one thing about the C0 to C1 as well as the C3, because the burst level, the burst level affects how these constellations work because of the way the resolve stats as well as the burst talent of Bell works. Basically, the burst talent of Bells will modify her damage, or rather her attack modifier from the talents. That's why you see a difference when it goes different levels of burst, as you can see here. But not to worry, for a simple math analysis, we will just take the average. So you take the average between the initial hit and the M41C combo, there's already a difference. The average of that, and then we take the average of level 9 and level 10, and that brings us the orange figures, which is 10.2%. Likewise, C0, C2 is 57.4, C1 to C2 is 42.9. Now you might wonder why this and this do not add up to this. It's very straightforward because this is compounded. C1 to C2, 42.9% is a compound interest. You can think of it like compound interest, where it's on top of, it includes the C1 effect. So when you go from C0 to C2, naturally it will be more than these two figures added together, about 4.3% more. Now for C2 to C3, it's the same thing. We have the initial hit and burst, the initial hit and M41C having a slight difference. Take the average, final average here. Likewise for C0 C3, it's actually a very, very impressive figure of 85.4%. Very, very impressive indeed. Now these are the figures. Okay, now you know how the damage boosts look like. Let me put them in a more structured way, which will be in this section. Okay. So let's talk about the percentage boost in DPS, just the elemental burst, not factoring the elemental skill. C0 to C1 is 10.2%, C1 to C2 is 42.9%, C0 to C2 is 57.4%, C2 to C3 is 17.8%, which is actually pretty nice. And then you have C0 to C3, which is 85.4%. It has to be that good, right? Because you spend a lot to get C0 to C3. But bear in mind that for other characters, their constellations actually don't give this much benefit. It's about 10 to 18% compound interest each constellation, generally speaking. But on Bell C2, you already see a 42.9%. That's insane, man. Insane value right here. Okay. Now, R1 Engulfing versus R5 catch. You have the figure that I just talked about just now, 27.4%. R2 Engulfing versus R5 catch is about 34%. I did a bit of additional math just to include R2 Engulfing so that we have a better view, because the number of pulls on C3 can more or less directly correlate to a R2 if you are unlucky. Yeah, and then now let's talk about the cost. We have finished talking about the percentage boost that each of these particular milestones give us. Now let's talk about the damage boost itself. Now before that, let me just hide this so that it gives a clearer view. Okay, now let me move the screen. See, yeah. Okay, so cost impulse. I did an optimistic approach where we assume that we actually won every 50-50, and it takes us slightly less than soft PT to get our pulls, which means when you go from C0 to C3 you'll need 195 pulls. It is pretty optimistic, honestly speaking. And then you have the worst case in terms of soft PT, which means it's 150, 300 and 450, and worst case meaning that you also lose every single 50-50. And look at the amount of pulls, it's more than doubled. This is worst case soft PT. And then you have worst case hard PT where you need 90 pulls and you lose every 50-50, so it's 540. So average, if I take the worst case soft PT versus the optimistic, which actually is this point here, you know what, let me hide this section as well. Don't worry, in my notes I will mention them too, the percentage differences when it's relevant. Okay, so first off, bear in mind that the optimistic cost figures above are just estimates and extrapolation. Okay, this is very important for me to state, because in the end it's down to luck. You can be very lucky and get a 5-star in the first 10 pool, or you can be unlucky and only get it on hard PT, right? I'm sure all of us had that streak before, whether it be a lucky streak or an unlucky moment or unlucky streak. Like for myself, I've been unlucky lately. Ayaka and Yoimiya has been quite bad at the pools. We've lost 50-50 most of the time, and most of the pools are at soft PT. So it really depends on luck. So bear in mind, unless you are doing 1000 plus pools, then the average will be more accurate. I know it's cut off, it's fine, it's not a very important statement. Basically, unless you do 1000 plus pools, the average is really just for reference. Likewise, for this figure here, I just put it here just for a reference for fun. Okay, it's just a reference for fun. It doesn't mean anything until you get the constellation. I can say that there's an average DPS boost of 0.09% per pool, but until you get the C1, you get 0 boost per pool. Alright, so let me just repeat, this is just for reference for fun. Doesn't mean anything until you actually get the constellation or you get the 5-star. Okay, now from my experience though, you will seldom hit hard PT. For me personally, having put so much in Genshin, of course not as much as the Mega Wheels because I don't see 6 R5 every character, but based on my experience so far, I have only reached hard PT 2 to 3 times. And 2 to 3 times where it's 80 plus pools instead of 70 plus pools at the soft PT point. So I'll say the average figure here is really an average between optimistic and worst case soft PT, which is not too far from the simulations figures actually shared in Reddit. If I didn't remember wrongly, the average figure is 105 for getting a featured 5-star and 63 for the average pool. So you see my figures here are not too far from what people have done in using machine simulation or the roles on the gacha. Okay, so just bear in mind, average figure is really just for reference. It doesn't mean that you will get the pools on this average. Not unless you are doing 1000 plus pools, such that it eventually averages down to the average figure or averages up to the average figure, depending on whether you're lucky or unlucky. Alright, so this is one thing I needed to say before we start the analysis because it's an important point. Okay, now let's talk about C2 versus R1. C1 gives you 10% boost, as I mentioned earlier. R1 gives you 27% boost. But note that at C0, you can get the max stats like what you have on C1 if you take your time to let her A1 take effect. A1 is the one where you get two resolve stats every 3 seconds. But if you do that, if you take your time, it means that you don't have a constant burst rotation. You're not fully utilizing her energy recharge or energy restoration. So it's likely an overall team DPS loss. Yeah, I needed to say this. It's slightly an overall team DPS loss because I know that there will be people who watch the video and tell me, hey, C1 doesn't give you 10% boost, you can just wait at C0. Yeah, wait and lose their DPS then, right? Something has to go when you are waiting. It's as simple as that. Now, if you have only 70 pulls after getting a C0 bell, it's really up to you which banner you want to try your luck on. But I'll say this, if the other 5-star weapon is good for one of your build characters, the other 5-star weapon featured on the banner, we don't know what that weapon is yet, it's actually not bad to put on the weapon banner. Especially if your account right now you only have 0 to 2 5-star weapons, it means that you have a chance of getting a 5-star weapon that can be useful for one of your build characters. I'm talking about off-banner weapon. You have the on-banner, the other 5-star on-banner weapon if it's good for one of your build characters, and if you don't have any 5-star or you only have like 0 to 2 5-star weapons, even if you do get an off-banner 5-star weapon, there's a chance that it's actually a pretty decent weapon for another one of your build characters. 5-star weapons are really good. I know most F2P players don't go for 5-star weapons, and I can perfectly understand why, because weapon banner is hell to pull for. It's not F2P friendly. I mean, even with the fate point system now, it's not F2P friendly. I'm quite disappointed that MiHoYo did not allow the fate points to carry forward. I think that would be really, really good for players. But okay, nevertheless, so what it means here, this point is 5-star weapons are pretty good. If you manage to get one that fits your team, it's not a good bad thing at all, even if you don't get R1 Engulfing. However, okay, now I shouldn't say however. Now let's look at the pulls. So looking at average figure, if you only have enough pulls to get C1 R1, which is approximately 110, let's say you have approximately 125 to 150 pulls, then R1 is the clear winner if you look at average. Okay, I must repeat this point. If you look at the average, which in this case is only 55 for R1 Engulfing, and average is 125. Of course, the C1 average is 107.5. But we look at the cost of the pools. Let's say you have enough pools for both this and this. R1 giving 27% boost is definitely better than a 10% boost from C1. Right? That's the point that this point is driving at. But we know that, like what I mentioned earlier, average doesn't mean that it will always follow the average figure. It's just average. It's still very, very dependent on your luck. So now let's say you don't believe in your luck. You find yourself to be an unlucky chap. Or you have very, very low risk appetite. So I'll say that if you look at the worst case soft pity in that case, if you have 150 pulls, your C1 is safer. Because you more or less how should I put it? You more or less have enough pulls to get it, even if you lose 50-50. So that really depends on how you see it. It really depends on your risk appetite. If you're willing to take the risk on the weapon banner, you get better returns. Why? 27% versus 10%. In the scenario where you only have about 150 pulls or 125 pulls, depending on how you see it, right? Whether you look at the average or the worst case of PT. This is what I can provide in terms of a mathematical analysis. But I must stress again that average is just an average figure. In the end, RNG luck is the one that decides how much pulls you need to get your 5 stars. But there's one important thing I want to bring out, which is C1 does bring you closer to the biggest DPS jump, which is C2. It brings you to the next step of the C2, which gives you 42.9% boost. So it offers a really, really great boost. And as a F2P player, let's say you're lucky, you save a lot of gems this time around, you're able to get your C1. Maybe for example, you are close to soft PT and you are on guaranteed right now. Then you actually have the chance, given the events, as well as 3 new islands, you might be able to pull for a second bell and get C1 now. And when bell rerun banner happens, you can actually try to get a C2, which is a very significant boost. So in a sense, getting C1, although it has lower boost than R1 Engulfing, you are investing for the future. So that's one way to look at it as well. Okay, don't worry, in my final notes I'll talk about what is my final recommendation. But I wanted to offer this type of different views and different counterpoints so that you guys can look at it objectively and decide what is the type of risk you want to take. Okay? C2 versus R1. So I already mentioned that going from C0 to C2 gives you a whopping 57.4% boost versus R1 that gives 27.4%. But obviously the cost and RNG factor is much larger. Obviously, if you already have an R1, if you already have a C1, going for C2 is the best option, since C1 to C2 is 42.9% versus R1 27.4%. Now, let's look at the average figures, right? If you only have 200 to 225 pulls, you can still try for C2, and you hope that you don't lose 50-50 more than once. So if you look at my average figures here, for C0 to C2, average is about 215 pulls. This factor in losing 50-50 once from C0 to C2. So out of 2 possible times where you may lose 50-50, we are assuming that you lose it once. So it makes more sense, yeah? Kinda average, but you could be lucky. You could be lucky and only get it. You could be lucky and win the 50-50 twice in a row and get yourself a C2 with just 130 pulls. And what does that mean? So it means that 200 pulls will be actually enough to get C2 plus R1, provided you're lucky on R1 as well. So that's why I say it's very dependent on luck. But if you look at worst case soft PT, if you only have 200 to 205 pulls, right? This is the 2 figures to look at. 195 for R1 Engulfing. C0, C2 if you are really unlucky, but not unlucky to the max yet, is 300 pulls required versus 195. So if your risk appetite is low, for example, you'd rather get something that is more or less guaranteed, then R1 will be safer. But it also means that your returns are lower because it's 27.4% versus 57.4%. You can go for a guaranteed 27.4% and give up entirely on 57.4%. So again, depends on your risk appetite and how lucky you are feeling. Now let's talk about the next stage, C3. For me personally, my personal experience, weapon banner is about 450 to 480 pulls for R5 with fate points. Because I've put on, let's see, the fate point system started on Mistsplitter. So I put for R5 Mistsplitter. I put for R5 Thundering Pulse. So this is really the figure that I'm getting, about 450 to 480. Actually for both it was closer to 450 pulls. So which coincidentally is also the worst case soft PT for a C3, which is 450. So what does all this mean? So it means that between the worst case soft PT for a C3 versus a R5, R5 gives you a 58% boost over R5 catch, while C0 C3 gives you 85.4%. So if you are someone who has 500 pulls, unlikely that I have to play very safe that much. But let's say if you're a Will with 500 pulls or a Dolphin who has decided to go all out on Bell, C3 is definitely the go-to option first. Any additional wishes remaining, you can go to the weapon banner for YOLO, because don't forget that the variance between when you're lucky and unlucky is huge. Look at this, the optimistic versus the non-optimistic. And by the way, this is optimistic only in the sense of winning the 50-50 every single time. And also pulls slightly earlier than soft PT. If I want to say extremely lucky person, it can be like what, 2 5 stars in one 10 pool, and then you get another one in another 10 pool. But let's be realistic. While that can happen, it happens to very few people. Okay, so yeah. So anyway, if you have 500 pulls, my recommendation, go for C3 without a single doubt. Any additional wishes, you go to weapon banner for YOLO. Alright, so let's talk about the final notes. Whew, this is gonna be a long one. So the catch is actually a very good F2P weapon, fits spell really well, and if you saw my weapon comparison video, it's pretty much on par with Scarlet Spine for her. So anyway, the videos I've talked about in this video, take for example the bell of math, the weapon comparison, etc. I'll put a link in the top right corner as well as in the description so that you guys can access those. You can easily watch them and understand where I'm coming from in this video. Now the only catch about the catch is we don't know how easy or hard it is to get R5. We don't know how rare the fish are. I know that based on what I can see from a certain website, one of the fish looks to be a very rare fish, but we don't know how rare it is. We don't know whether it's billet rare or just takes effort to farm and get it, to fish and get it. So we really don't know how easy or hard it is until 2.1 is out, unfortunately. But I think getting an R1 should be doable. It's just how long does it take to get an R5. Right. Now, taking future into consideration, pulls on character and weapon banner contribute towards guaranteed on banner if you didn't get the on banner one, but weapon fate points will reset. I hate this point. I hate it that the weapon fate points will reset. It is what it is. This is what MiHoYo has designed. So C1 brings you closer to C2 when Bell rerun banner comes, though it may take a few months if you look at the Venti and Zhongli rerun as a reference. Now, one more thing I want to bring out is that Engulfing is also very niche to Bell due to her A4. Her A4 gives you an electro damage bonus based on her ER. And that's why this weapon would be good on her as opposed to, say, the other characters who can make good use of the catch, like Xianling and Rosaria, for example. Those two characters, I would say that the catch bonuses like elemental burst damage increase and elemental crit burst crit rate increase is a lot better than the attack buff given by Engulfing. Engulfing is so good for Bell because it doesn't just give you attack buff, it also gives you electro damage bonus, and it also allows you to easily hit the 300% ER that Bell wants. At least if you're on R1 Engulfing. If you're not on R1 Engulfing, then it's 200% ER. So you see the difference. Engulfing allows Bell to go for 300% ER, as opposed to other weapons, it's better to go for 200% ER, which means that your battery function is slightly not limited, but slightly lower. Actually, it's slightly lower, it's lower, okay. And that's the problem with Engulfing, right? It's so niche to Bell. Unlike the other weapons like Mistsplitter and Thundering Pulse, which are a lot more flexible. Mistsplitter I can easily give it to several characters. I mean, even if I don't have elemental attack on the character, it will still do a very good amount of damage. Thundering Pulse, I think I've already shown how it works on Yoimiya and how it works on Child. It's really good. So in that case, right, it may be better to go for Constellations compared to other. Given these points, these 3 points, I think that it's actually better to go for her Constellations compared to the other featured 5-star characters, for example. And you hope that you get lucky enough to get C2. Especially if your account happens to already have a decent number of 5-star weapons, you don't stand to gain as much from losing 50-50 on weapon banner. I know you want the correct target is to target for 50-50, winning 50-50. But let's be realistic. If you're unlucky, you're unlucky. Okay? So all of these points above makes me feel that it's better to go for a Constellations. Personally, I would recommend to go for Constellations. Even if you don't get an immediate boost right now, it brings you closer to the C2. So you can get a 10% boost first, and in future when Bell Renown banner comes, you can get the C2 Bell and get your whopping 42.9% boost. So personally, I would recommend Constellations, but there are some caveats, like all the different points I've mentioned. So based on these points, you may also want to go for weapon, if these points talk about getting the weapon, especially depending on your risk appetite. Okay, how more willing you are to take the risk. If you already have C2, R1 will give you, sorry, I should start with this. By the way, if you're lucky enough to get C0 and C1 bell in one tempo, I think it's a no-brainer, go for C2, right? I've already talked about C2 being so insanely good so far. If you already have C2, R1 will give you a better boost than C3. Why? Because R1 gives you 27.4%, C3 gives you 17%, 17 plus percent. Yeah, I remember it's 17 plus percent, close to 18%. Now, if you intend to give Bell Homa, which is the next best 5-star weapon as for my weapon comparison, then you should definitely go for C2 or C3 instead of R1 Engulfing. The benefit that you get from going from a Homa to R1 Engulfing, if I didn't remember wrongly, R1 is 10%, R5 is 5%, or is it the other way around? Okay, you know what, actually I have the figures here. Let's just check that. Yeah, so R1 Homa versus R1 Engulfing is only 5.1%. R5 Homa versus R5 Engulfing is 11.19%. So if you're going to give a R1 Homa to your bell, you actually don't need to pull for Engulfing. It's a no-brainer to go straight for C2 or even C3. Alright? So last most important point, please spend responsibly within your means. Okay? End of the day, it's a gacha game. Spend within your means and spend responsibly, and spend the amount that you yourself is comfortable with. You don't want a scenario where you spend and you regret. Gotta avoid that. Alright? End of the day, it's your money. What I can do here is just to provide a mathematical analysis, some insight on what I think are the different types of scenarios when you should go for the character banner or the weapon banner based on the different milestones that you may be at, from C1 to C3 and also the R1. And lastly, in general, to me personally, I would recommend to go for Constellations rather than a 5-star weapon because of all of these points mentioned here. Okay, so I hope this video has been helpful to you guys. I end up speaking longer than I wanted to again. That's a constant problem with me. So if you like the content, remember to like the video and click subscribe for more. Yeah. Thanks everyone for watching. Bye.